Hey guys, we're back here now. It's really to the meat of our broadcast is we're going to get into tournament and we're going to show you what our brackets, what we think is going to happen. And if you look here at the bracket here, we're going to do South Region first. First game we have is Kansas versus Western Kentucky. And if you'll notice here, we have put our logos next to the name of their schools. And the way we're going to pick them is this is going to be Dillon Hutton, this is going to be Coach Caywood, and this is going to be Dakota Jones. And that's the way the board is going to run all the way across. As you look at this, that's how the picks are going to go, and you'll see as we differ a little bit. And so I'm just going to go through real quick, give you my picks, then we're going to talk about one of the first round games that we think is going to be an important game, and just a little bit of a controversy between us as we pick. And we're going to talk about why we think that game is going to go the way it's going to go. So if you look here, my first picks, I have Kansas beating Western Kentucky, just too athletic, too good of a team. I know all of you are looking at the UNC-Villanova game, which will be Friday, 7 o'clock, TNT. Make sure you tune in. You're going to get to see my Tar Heels. And they will beat Villanova no matter what people say. They're going to move on. We're too good. We're scoring too much right now. The next game, the VCU, they're really putting up a stir in people yet again. And, of course, we're going to move them on past Akron as they don't have their point guard. Michigan and South Dakota State, we're going to come back to that as our impact game there at the start and first round of the region. And I know you're going to get mad, I have South Dakota. The Jackrabbits are going to move on. Upset city, baby, right there, as Dickie V would say. Next game, we have UCLA and Minnesota. I'm going to have Minnesota moving on in that one. I think they're just a little too good for UCLA. Also, I'm just going to have to down UCLA. The Ware twins, Drew, former UNC players that couldn't make it UNC, went over to UCLA. Oh, bring me the sunshine, baby. I like all the girls in bikinis, but at the end of the day, they're going to go home. My Tar Heels are going to go on. All right? So UCLA is going down. Minnesota's moving on. Then we get Florida, who I think is just too good for Northwestern State. San Diego State, I got them. I know that's an upset city too for some of you. A lot of people's going to pick Oklahoma right there, but I'm going San Diego State moving on. I think they're a good offensive team, and they're going to put points on the board. And last, Georgetown is going to move on. Just too good for the Florida team there. So now we'll move on and let Dillon Hutton come in and pick his picks.
All right. Coach got pretty excited there about his Tar Heels. So we'll go ahead and start with my Kansas-Western Kentucky game. Like I said, McLemore, those four seniors, they're too much for Western Kentucky. Based on athleticism and postseason experience, Kansas moves on there in my spot. UNC-Villanova, that was a tough game for me. Each time I did a bracket, I had Villanova winning, UNC winning. But I think Coach Caywood and Dakota Jones rubbed off on me a little bit, so I went with UNC. I think Roy Williams is a great coach. I think they pushed past Villanova, even though Villanova has a good record against top 25 teams. VCU and Akron. VCU, how could you not be a believer in the Rams? I'm moving VCU up again. And in the Michigan and South Dakota State game, I can't go out on a limb like Coach Caywood can. So I've got to stick with Michigan. I think the athletes persevere in that game and get the win. Minnesota and UCLA. I'm sticking with Coach Caywood's pick. I've got Minnesota beating UCLA. I just can't have faith in that Pac-12 basketball. Florida and Northwestern State. Florida coming off that SEC championship loss. I'm going to pound it into the Florida fans' heads that they got beat by Ole Miss. But I've got Florida moving on after that just because of their experience. Eric Murphy on the outside, a 7-footer who can knock down a 3-ball and rebound for that Florida team. Billy Donovan is also a great coach comes tournament time. San Diego State, Oklahoma. I've got Oklahoma moving on over San Diego State. I just like that matchup. I think Oklahoma played some good teams there in the Big 12 overall, and I think maybe that's going to get them to push. That's a tough game though to pick, so I'll go Oklahoma though. Very even bracket on this side. Georgetown, Florida Gulf Coast. Florida Gulf Coast had a good year, made it the first team to make it into the tournament. They're going to be the first. They're going to be out in the first round. Georgetown moves on just based on that Big East experience. Played great in the Big East, and Big East is a really tough conference. Like I said, they sent 8 teams to the tournament. Great team. Georgetown's going to move on, and that fills out my South region. We're going to go to Dakota Jones.
In the first game against Kansas, Western Kentucky, I have Kansas. They're just way too athletic than Western Kentucky. I got them advancing to the next round. UNC and Villanova. I'm also a believer in a Tar Heel. I've liked UNC my whole life. I think Roy Williams is too good of a coach. He's going to out-coach Nova's coach. I think a 4-guard matchup is going to outdo Nova. My next match, VCU and Akron. VCU, I've been in a believer in them since my sophomore year when they went to state. Our girls went to state. We went to watch them. I think VCU is just too athletic and up-tempo. Michigan and South Dakota State. Coach Caywood picked South Dakota State. I don't believe in that because Michigan has 2 first-rounders probably on their team. Tim Hardaway Jr., former son of the Tim Hardaway, which is a Hall of Famer, has a jersey retired. I think Michigan rolls them over. It's over. Don't move on to the next round. Minnesota and UCLA. I think the 3 players from UNC is going to come over there, and they're going to advance over Minnesota with Larry Drew having a 7 assist a game. I think he's his own powering through. Florida and Northwestern State. Northwestern State has #1 offense in the nation scoring, but I think Florida is coming off that SEC championship loss. I think they're going to have something to prove and come out and show them how powerful they are. The next one's San Diego State and Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma matches up well with their guards. San Diego State has a good small forward, which could play a big factor in this game, but I think Oklahoma wins. Georgetown and Florida Gulf Coast. I think Georgetown's defense is just too good, and Georgetown advances. I'm going to go to the next round.
Well, Dakota, before we do that, we're going to go to our big matchup game here, Michigan, South Dakota State. There's where we differ a little bit, and I'm going to say a little bit about that. South Dakota State is undermanned, and you've got to pick a Cinderella team. You've got to pick somebody. You've got to pick upsets. This thing is, you can't just pick the high seed. So this is my upset game, and I agree with Dakota Jones. Here's an NBA team, Tim Hardaway's son. And I know a lot of people may not know him, but the Killer Crossover was a fantastic NBA player. And really that Michigan team is an athletic group with Burke. They really have a Robinson. They got an NBA team, but my South Dakota State is going to be that Cinderella team. My guy Walters is going to come in. You heard it here first. Do not be shocked if that kid don't put up 40 points on him. Don't be shocked if he don't dominate that game. I don't think that they've got enough in them to go all the way to the Final Four, but they're going to be upset city. Michigan Wolverines, you better beware. Here comes the Jackrabbits.
I don't agree with that. I think Michigan, like I said, they have NBA players talent on their team. Their athleticism doesn't bother South Dakota State. I think South Dakota State hasn't met a defender all year like Trey Burks and Tim Hardaway Jr. Trey Burks is going to lead them over South Dakota State. And Jackrabbits, that's probably the most retarded symbol I saw in the NCAA besides the Smurf over there. But Michigan wins. It's over. Columbia River Jackrabbits.
All right, now guys, we're going to show you the rest of our bracket here, and we're going to go in more detail as we get into our next broadcast, which will be next week. All right, and we'll show you how we did, and hopefully we'll get some responses. We're waiting on tweets and emails, and we want to see how you're going to do in your brackets as well. But what I've done, and we'll go ahead and look at it, I've got Kansas versus North Carolina. Of course, I'm going with Carolina. Roy Williams over his former team. I think that's an easy pick for me. I got VCU versus the Jackrabbits. Jackrabbits put up and take away Michigan, but they don't have enough to move on. I got VCU. Shocker going on. All right. Then the next one, I've got Minnesota and Florida. We're going to pick Florida. I think they're just a better team there. Minnesota, who is going to do away with UCLA, just not going to have enough for the Florida offense. The next one I've got San Diego State versus Georgetown, and Georgetown is my team. I got Georgetown moving on. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and pick you up all the way through my South region. I've got North Carolina versus VCU, and yes, you are right. My Carolina Tar Heels will advance, and they'll go to the grade A. Then I had Florida versus Georgetown, which I think is a good matchup right here. And Georgetown just got a little too much on the defensive side for Florida, able to hold them down. And I got Georgetown moving on. My North Carolina versus Georgetown matchup disheartens me, but I do have Georgetown moving on to win the South region. So let's look and see how Dillon Hutton does.
Here's my picks for the rest of the South region. I've got Kansas beating UNC, unlike Coach Caywood, who really has a lot of faith in his Tar Heels. I think Kansas, the 4 seniors, and Macklemore is going to win that one. I've got VCU over Michigan, which some people would consider an upset, but I think Shaka Smart's a good coach. So now we've got Kansas versus VCU, and I've got Kansas going on up here. Down here, I've got Minnesota versus Florida. I've got Florida beating Minnesota out of pure athletes. I think Minnesota's run right there, they got a little lucky with UCLA. I think Florida moves on. I've got Oklahoma down here at the bottom with Georgetown. I've got Georgetown moving on based on that Big East style of play. Here I've got Kansas versus Georgetown. Kansas again, something's got me on this Kansas wagon here, and I'm going to put Kansas as the South Region champion. So Kansas will be moving to the Final Four.
Next round here, I got Kansas over North Carolina. I love North Carolina, but I think Kansas is a better team this year with their post. In this one, I got Michigan. Is that too much talent? They're going to move on. They're going to beat VCU. UCLA versus Florida. I got Florida. They're going to roll them. Oklahoma and Georgetown. I think Georgetown's defense is too good for Oklahoma. I think Georgetown wins. Kansas versus Michigan. I think Michigan's going to roll past them. I think Kansas is going to choke against Michigan. Florida versus Georgetown. I got Florida beating Georgetown. I think Florida's got too many weapons. And Michigan versus Florida for my final who comes out of this bracket. I got Michigan beating them. The talent's just too much.
All right, guys, we're back, and now we're going to go to our East bracket here, which I think is going to have our national champion in it. So you'll have to wait and see who I'm going to pick for that. Our first game, we got Indiana versus Brooklyn or JMU, whichever one of those teams win on Tuesday night. We don't know that yet, but it does not matter. Indiana moves on. Zayler's going to be enough to push that past. We got North Carolina State versus Temple, and I am going to go North Carolina State ACC. They're underrated, didn't play like they should. Hopefully this is a new season for them. They're going to make it through it. I'll be in California. UNLV, I'm going to pick them to move on. I like UNLV. I think they got a good style to beat California. Their big man in the post there is going to be enough to push them through. Syracuse and Montana, I like the 2-3 zone. Bonham, he's a good coach. Syracuse moves on with that one. Here's my big game, Butler versus Bucknell, and I am going to pick Bucknell. I think Muscali, he's a big guy. He's going to score a bunch of points. Defensively, I think that may be one of the better teams in our tournament. Defense wins championships, so I'm moving them on, and I've heard it already on the internet. They're the new Butler. Go ahead and put it in your books. Marquette versus Davidson. Marquette's going to be just a little bit too athletic. I know Davidson's got a good game, but hey, old baby, Seth Curry is now in the NBA. He's not going to be there with them. He's not going to be there to help them. All right, so we're moving Marquette on. Illinois and Colorado. I got Illinois moving on just for the simple fact that Illinois, I think, is a little bit better offensively than Colorado. Miami and Pacific. Miami, ACC regular season and tournament champions. I think they're playing as good basketball as anybody. Move them on to the next round. So let's see what Dillon Hutton has.
All right, and for my East bracket, we'll start with Indiana up here against LIU Brooklyn. I really don't think it matters. Indiana's a 1 seed. They're going to prove it. They're going to win that basketball game. NC State Temple. NC State again. ACC pulling through again. Good game right there between NC State and Temple. UNLV in California. UNLV's going on because, like I said, no faith in Pac-12 teams. I have no faith. Syracuse, Montana. I'm going to go with Syracuse because Jim Boeheim, great coach. Another one of those Big East teams. The ACC is going to be really exciting next year with them in there, but I've got Syracuse moving on. I really think Syracuse is one of those teams, the way they're playing right now, they can really make a push towards that Final Four. We'll see as far as I get in this bracket. We've got Butler over here with Bucknell. I've got to say, along with Coach Caywood, I think Bucknell is the new Butler. I've got them moving on past Butler. Marquette Davidson down here. Marquette is a really good team. I've got them moving on past Davidson. The higher seed there is going to win that one. Illinois and Colorado. Illinois moving on just because of their experience playing good basketball. Miami and the Pacific, I really think Miami's on a mission winning the ACC regular season and winning the tournament. Miami's a really good team. Miami moves on past the first round. Now we're going to go to Dakota Jones with his picks.
Same here in the East bracket. I got Indiana beating whoever wins tonight. Indiana will go on. NC State and Temple. I think NC State's just too much for Temple. Hopefully NC State figures out how to get back on track. They haven't been as good as people thought they were going to be this year. UNLV, California. I got UNLV. Just, they're too talented. Syracuse and Montana. The 2-3 zones don't bother Montana. I think Montana doesn't see much bigger schools like the Big East sees Syracuse. Butler and Bucknell. I'm staying with Butler. They've been a tournament team. They've made 2 national championships runs, and everybody doubted them. So why doubt them now? I got them beaten back now. Marquette and Davidson. I'm good with Davidson in this one. I haven't saw Davidson in a tournament in a while since Steph Curry. I think Davidson has the same record as when Steph Curry was there. And Davidson's just a good perimeter shooting. I think Marquette's going to have trouble guarding the perimeter with him. Illinois in Colorado. I got Illinois just because, like Dillon Hutton said, the Big Ten, 2 that talented. Miami Pacific. Miami's just doing good this year. They're about perfect for 3. They're just too much for Pacific, I think.
And now let's go ahead and finish out the East bracket. I've got Indiana, which I think is one of the best teams here, going against North Carolina State. Indiana will move on. Next game, I have UNLV versus Syracuse, and I'm going to have UNLV going on against Syracuse. I think UNLV, their big man, is going to be a difference against that 2-3 matchup that Syracuse versus Marquette. I have got Bucknell moving on. I know what you're saying. The new Butler, there they go. Put it in the bank. Illinois versus Miami, and the ACC's been represented by my Tar Heels and Miami moving on here. And then as we get into the next matchup, I've got Indiana versus UNLV. Even though UNLV's got that big guy, Zeller nullifies him, and Indiana moves on. Then we got Bucknell versus Miami, and Miami just has way too much. Larkin is going to go off at this point in time. He's going to make his case for being a player of the year on down the road. And we got Miami versus IU, which I think is the best game of the grade 8, and it's going to be a fantastic game. And Indiana is going to squeak out a win over Miami, moving on into the Final Four. And that's my bracket in the East.
Game from the East here, starting it out. Indiana, NC State, I think is a trap game for the Hoosiers. But I've got Indiana moving on. Zeller and Victor Oladipo. They've got a good team. I think they can make a run here, and we'll see how far I take them later on in the show. Got UNLV, Syracuse. Jim Boeheim wins again. Syracuse goes on. Bucknell versus Marquette. I've got Marquette going on and beating Bucknell. I think maybe athleticism plays a part right there. Down here we've got a pretty good matchup. Illinois, Miami. I'm going to push Miami back through. The ACC will be represented again for Coach Caywood. Up here we've got Indiana versus Syracuse, and I think this is another good game. But I'm going to push Indiana back through just because of that athleticism. Down here at the bottom, Marquette and Miami, and I'm going to push Miami through. Like I said, Miami's a great team, and another Indiana-Miami game. Indiana goes on and wins the East.
Bracket, I got Indiana over NC State. Zeller rolls. UNLV versus Syracuse. I got Syracuse winning. Butler and Davidson. I think Davidson's this year's Cinderella team. I think I got them advancing. Illinois and Miami. Miami's coming off the ACC championship. I think they're going to beat Illinois. And then, which brings me back up here, Indiana versus Syracuse. I got Indiana winning. And Davidson versus Miami. I think Miami's just too talented, and Miami advances. And then Indiana versus Miami. I think Miami's just going to be wore out. Zeller's unbounded inside, and Indiana's going to advance.